Great. All right. Well, thank you for coming today, everybody. Glad you're here. I'm Kaylin Gilman. I'm with the Clallam Resilience Project. And we're going to be talking today about helping people flourish. This is a neuroscience training, so if you missed it in the past couple emails, it's neuroscience, epigenetics, average childhood experiences, and resilience. We're going to be moving through those today, spending 5 to 10 minutes on each. So this is a very quick, brief overview, and there are opportunities to do a deeper dive if this piques your interest. So hopefully we'll be getting a shared understanding of the neurosciences, developing a common language amongst ourselves, and yeah, I'm excited to dive in. We will have an optional Q&A at the end for questions and discussion from 10:45 to 11. So before we begin, please join me in expressing our deepest gratitude and respect for Indigenous neighbors and leaders, the Lower Elwha Clallam, Quileute, Ho, Makah, Chimicum, Quinault, and Jamestown's Clallam tribes for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. I also want to thank Olympic Community of Health for bringing this curriculum to Clallam County. Thank you to United Way of Clallam County, who hosts the Clallam Resilience Project and has been creating a space for us to continue this work in the community. And also thank you for being here and taking some time out of your Friday to come to this training today. As for who we are in this room, we're not all Kaylin Gilman, so apologies about that. But we are a group of people from a variety of sectors. We have caring community members, business and workforce, all the way down to social work and folks who didn't fit in a box. And then that's in addition to our other roles such as parent or neighbor or caregiver. So again, my hope today is developing a shared understanding of the neurosciences in all these different areas of life. And then in terms of familiarity with this topic, we have some folks who this is completely new. If so, that's great, you're in the right place. That's what today is about. It is an introductory training. We also have folks who have a lot of experience in this area. So hopefully if you're here with a lot of experience, you recognize that this is not just a one and done conversation, that this is an ongoing process. And I know personally, I've found over the past couple of years that I've been really learning more deeply about these issues. I feel like when I hear it from a new perspective or a new curriculum or a new voice, that I usually take away something new. So I hope that's the case for you today. So thank you for being here. So here we are, the neurosciences. I want to say just briefly before we begin that we're going to be talking today about the impacts of trauma. And if this is a topic that hits close to home for you, if this is your lived experience, if you're feeling overwhelmed with the state of the world, please tend to your own needs first. Turn off the camera, take a break, whatever you need to do. There's no need to force something that isn't feeling good. So we're going to kick things off with a little exercise called the Teeter Totter. And I'd like for us to answer in the chat this first question here. What factors helped you thrive or would have helped you thrive as a child? So you can put in the chat the answer to that question. I'm seeing loving family, friends, safe, supportive adults, siblings. Absolutely, these are all great resilience factors. Structure, extracurricular, time with family, safety, supportive mental health, family. Wonderful, thank you. On the other side, let's think about, in thinking about thriving, what is your biggest concern for children in our community today? Food insecurity, Lack of resources and support, absolutely. Lack of access to safety, to food. These are all excellent points. So on the next slide, I have some answers that folks have responded in the past. You might see some overlap with the things that we've shared in the chat. Oh, I see screen time in the chat, parents that are busy, lack of knowledge of age-appropriate development, absolutely. So you may see some overlap. You can second some of the things that are up here if you'd like in the chat. And so imagine all your responses up there as well. Another way of thinking about this, on the two sides of the teeter-totter, we have adversity and we have resilience. And our experiences in life can push that fulcrum one way or the other, and the balancing happens, right? Most of us are going to have both experiences, right? So another way we can think about these is the fulcrum being our epigenetics, the DNA, and our neuroscience. So as we have these life experiences and we get pushed one way or the other, that affects our brain development and that affects our epigenetics, and that's going to impact kind of where the teeter-totter falls. So that's what we're talking about today, the neurosciences, neuroscience, epigenetics, average childhood experiences, and resilience. So thanks for participating in that with me. So we're going to start with the neuroscience. I'm going to start us off with a short video. The full video is about 9 minutes, and we're just going to watch about 4 minutes of it. If you want to watch the whole thing, it is linked on the resource list. And I'll just start playing this, and if you, Kelsey, if there's no sound or something, will you just wave me down?
Over half of us have a chronic disorder such as
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
Over half of us have a chronic disorder such as high blood pressure or autoimmune disease. Rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction are skyrocketing. Why? The roots of these issues and more can often be traced to trauma, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and ultimately, nervous system dysregulation. Meet your autonomic nervous system. Let's call it ANS. ANS takes care of a lot of your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, digestion, and body temperature. ANS also manages your survival and stress response, working to keep you alive when your life is in danger. ANS functions as our built-in detection system, constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. As ANS scans the environment, it has 3 general responses or states. Safe. You feel calm, relaxed, and connected to those around you. Mobilized. When ANS detects danger, it sends a command and your heart rate and breathing increase, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can handle the threat. This is our fight-flight response. Immobilized. When ANS detects that the danger is so great that you can't fight or run, it shuts you down. In this state, our heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature decrease, and pain-numbing endorphins are released. ANS does all of this automatically without us thinking about it. ANS doesn't just use these states for survival. It uses them to navigate through the world each day. When ANS functions well, it moves fluidly from one state to another, 1 minute mobilized and ready for action, and the next resting and recovering. ANS will often blend states together. When we play, ANS combines the mobilized and safe states. And when we are intimate with loved ones, it combines immobilized and safe states. When ANS can stay flexible and fluid like this, it helps us manage and become resilient to stress and negative events. We're able to bounce back and move on. Unfortunately, when we experience trauma and chronic stress, it can keep ANS from functioning in a healthy, regulated, and resilient way. and can keep us stuck in states of survival. A friendly get-together can become frightening. A simple meeting at work can become threatening. For those with a history of trauma and chronic stress, the ANS detection system often becomes faulty, constantly signaling danger even when we are safe. It's like ANS is an alarm system, constantly signaling fire even when there's no smoke and no flames. Consistently living in these survival states can be debilitating, and we often develop adaptive strategies like using drugs, alcohol, food, work, or sex in an attempt to bring regulation and temporary relief. Understanding how trauma impacts us is critically important. There is a whole spectrum of experiences that can be traumatizing and adversely impact ANS, like accidents, assaults, and natural disasters, which are often called shock traumas. There is also developmental or relational trauma, when we experience chronic adversity, abuse, neglect, and lack of safety while growing up. Many other experiences can be traumatizing, including chronic stress, medical procedures, and adverse community environments like poverty, discrimination, and violence. Additionally, new research in epigenetics shows us that trauma can get passed down genetically at least 3 generations. In the past, we've thought about trauma as events that happen to us. We now know that trauma is an experience, not an event. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. It's our response to the event rather than the event itself.
All right, so as we can see from the video, our experiences in life don't just reside as memories in our mind, but they're actually imprinted on our nervous system and stored in our physiology. So what does this mean for a child who experiences a lot of adversity early on in life? Obviously, everyone has their own unique story. There's lots of nuance, but just for the sake of this presentation, let's imagine 2 life paths. We have one child who grows up in a household where they're repeatedly exposed to danger. Maybe they witness domestic violence. Maybe they experience physical abuse. Maybe there's substance dependency and inconsistent care. This child has to survive, right, in this environment. And this child is going to develop adaptations in order to survive. So in the chat, you can think about what are some adaptations that this child may develop in order to support their survival in that kind of environment. So another way of thinking about this is what kind of characteristics might they take on? I see hiding within themselves, absolutely. A lack of social skills. Becoming a peacemaker, taking on that role, trying to appease, absolutely. I'll throw in a couple as well. They may become a fixer, definitely, Janice. They may become hypervigilant, constantly scanning like we saw in the video, just constantly aware. They may have a harder time self-regulating their nervous system due to that constant stress cycle being activated, absolutely. So then moving down to the bottom pathway, a child who experiences safety in the home, they have their needs tended to on a regular basis. They're also adapting to their environment. So what types of adaptations might they receive or become due to their environment? Might develop self-confidence. They might have more opportunity to be creative and explore. They might have developed trust of others. They might become leaders. Absolutely. So this is to say that adaptations aren't right or wrong or good or bad. In fact, in some ways they're all good, and that they support our survival in any given situation. So taking a closer look at brain development, at birth, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we already have a few neural connections. It's not completely a blank slate. At elementary age, that's where we're making tons of new connections. We're like a sponge just soaking up new information, gaining language. And these new neural pathways are based on our environment and our experiences. And then you can see on the right-hand side, around puberty, we don't actually keep all of the neural connections we make in childhood. There's a pruning process that occurs, and we keep the neural connections that we're using repeatedly, and some of the others that are used less frequently begin to fade away. This isn't to say you can never make new neural connections again. It just takes a little more effort than it did when you were in childhood. You can think about learning a language. People say it's really easy to learn a language when you're at that age because you're in that process of developing all these new neural connections. You can still learn a language later. It just takes a little more effort and sustained practice. So when we think about that child who grew up in a dangerous life situation, what kind of adaptations they bring to social situations, there may be some friction there. There may be some challenges. If a child comes to school and they are hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger, they're on edge, they may be distrustful of adults, they may be withdrawn, somebody said like retreating into themselves. These behaviors may seem disruptive or antisocial. And as we saw in the video, they may be reading situations as threatening even when they aren't in imminent danger. So if the institutions and the adults around this child don't have a solid understanding of these behaviors as supportive of survival, a lot of times those behaviors are met with punishment, sometimes shame, sometimes blame. And so I would like to pose this to you that if we have, for example, an EMT gets lots of training, lots of guidance and support for how to thrive in a chaotic environment. Some children and adults even are going to need that same training and guidance and support in learning how to thrive in a calm or controlled environment. So we can't change what has happened in the past to our nervous system, but we can learn to work with it more intentionally in any given moment from day to day. For example, right now in the middle of this training, you might try experimenting a little bit with your posture. You could try to find some spinal alignment with your head over your heart over your hips, and see how that changes how you sit, how you feel in your body. At the back of the head there's the brainstem, and the cerebral spinal fluid passes through the brainstem, and it kind of acts as a drain for that fluid to circulate down and around the spine and coat all of our nerve endings. So when we're in that hunched over posture that many of us are familiar with on the left, many of us find ourselves there throughout the day, which is totally normal. But if we can bring ourselves back to that spinal alignment every so often, we're allowing that cerebral spinal fluid to circulate a little bit better. So again, we can't necessarily change our past, but we can try to work with ourselves where we're at on a daily basis. Okay, that concludes the end portion of our training, and we'll move quickly into epigenetics. I only have a couple of slides here, and if you want a deeper dive, there are some more resources on the resource list. So epigenetics is a relatively new scientific field that explains how our experiences and our environmental conditions can create changes in how our DNA is read and transcribed. So it's not changing the DNA itself, but it's leaving markers on the DNA that then get passed down. So epi means on top of, genetics, your genes. So someone could exhibit signs of trauma without having been actually exposed themselves. And the good news about epigenetics is that not only can trauma be transmitted through generations, but healing has that potential as well. So in thinking about historical trauma, that term can be misleading because when we hear the word historical, we tend to think of something that happened in the past. But historical trauma is very much with us here in the present. So this slide came from a 2009 study that asked Indigenous children in North America about their daily thoughts of loss. So we can see here that roughly 1 in 4 children are thinking every day or more about loss of people they knew, of their language, and losses associated with alcoholism. 1 in 5 are thinking every day or more about loss of culture, land, and spiritual ways. And 1 in 6 are thinking every day or more about loss of trust, family ties, and respect. So obviously these are heavy burdens for children to bear. And the questions here are about their daily thoughts. But as we know, this doesn't just affect their memories and their thoughts, but actually their genes and their nervous system as well, their physiology. So that being said, again, resilience and healing can also be passed down through the generations and are also present with us. So that was it for epigenetics. Like I said, there's like a 3-minute animated video on epigenetics that is in the resource list. I encourage you to check out because I think it explains it in a way that's simple and digestible and entertaining. So if you're curious, that's there for you as well. So we've been talking about trauma more on the intergenerational level and also the individual level. So now we're going to move into thinking about the ACE study, which is thinking about trauma across a large population. So we're going to look at a study conducted in the 90s called the Average Childhood Experience Study. It was conducted by these 2 scientists, Drs. Robert Anda and Vincent Felitti, and they were looking to see, sorry if you're seeing that, they were looking to see if there were any connections between adversity experienced during early childhood and health outcomes later in life. So the CDC and Kaiser Permanente partnered together to study over 17,000 participants in San Diego. And this study was pretty unique at the time because previously there had been studies done looking at a single type of adversity and a single health outcome. So making a 1-to-1 correlation. And this study was unique in that it studied multiple types of adversity and multiple types of health outcomes. So these are the original 10 ACEs that they identified. Since the 90s, this conversation has really expanded to include things beyond abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction, to include things like racism, poverty, and homelessness, other types of adversity that weren't captured in this original study. But originally they identified these 10, which include physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, and then several types of household dysfunction like caregiver with substance dependence or mental illness or incarceration, among others. So the first thing that they found is that unfortunately ACEs are incredibly common. A third of their participants had an ACE score of 0, meaning 2/3 had experienced at least 1, and then 16% of the group had 4 or more. And this study was conducted on folks who were on a preventative healthcare plan, meaning most of them were educated, middle class, had excellent healthcare, employed, etc. The other thing that they found is that there is a dose-response relationship to people experiencing lots of adversity in life in early childhood, and then health problems later in life, like heart disease, diabetes, and depression. So in fact, as the ACE score goes up, the percentage of people with these health and social problems also goes up. So you can see the left-hand column is people with 0 ACEs, the right hand is 5 or more. And so this dose-response relationship, another example you can think about is the more gas you put in your car, the more miles you can drive. So in this case, the more adversity experienced in childhood, the more likely one is to develop health problems later in life. And if you're looking at this data and you're like realizing you have a high ACE score and you're panicking, I just want to say that this does not work as a predictive tool on an individual level. This was designed to look at patterns across society. So there are lots of protective factors that help to mitigate some of the impacts of trauma, which is why it's that other side of the Teeter Totter, right? So that's why it doesn't work exactly as a predictive tool. So I'm going to invite you to participate in this stamping exercise. So on the top of your screen, if you move your mouse, you should see a toolbar pop up at the top. And if you click View Options and then drop down to Annotate, you'll get a toolbar that pops out. And one of the options is Stamp. Now, if you're not into technology or this just feels overwhelming for you or you're on a phone or something, you can absolutely participate in the chat. This is not necessary, but if you'd like to try this stamping tool, now is the time. So View Options, Annotate, and then Stamp. So on this wheel, we have identified various health and social problems. So I'd like for you to stamp the top 3 of these issues that you would like to reduce in your community. And chances are most of us care a lot about all of these, but just for this exercise, choose your top 3. I'm seeing some stamps pop up, and again, if you're not into the stamping tool, you can put things in the chat as well. So I'm seeing asthma, recent depression, suicide, alcohol and binge drinking, anxiety. Excellent. Life dissatisfaction. Absolutely. They're all important issues, right? All right, so I'll give it another 3 seconds for folks to finish up. And we'll move on to the next slide. So this slide shows the percentage of those health and social problems that epidemiologists estimate are caused by ACEs. So the oil spill represents the percentage of that problem that is potentially preventable by preventing ACEs. Meaning that if we didn't have average childhood experiences, we could potentially reduce suicide by 67%, depression by 40%, marijuana use by 54%, anxiety by 55%. These are huge percentages of these social problems. And I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. All right. So the ACE study has really changed the way we think about public health and human behavior. The old model suggested that poor choices and behaviors led to negative health outcomes. What the findings of this study helped us understand is not only does early exposure to toxic stress lead to negative health outcomes, but that our parents' and our grandparents' experiences of adversity can impact us as well. And bringing it closer to home, a survey conducted in 2014 showed that 1/3 of Clallam County adults reported having 3 or more ACEs. And then, of course, on top of the trauma and stress that people are experiencing, there's COVID, and that's another layer of toxic stress that's being added in and perhaps exacerbating the trauma that already exists for folks. So this information can feel pretty heavy, but the exciting thing is that with this awareness, we have a choice in how we think about health and social behavior and how we respond. Those of us here today come from different sectors, different fields of work. but we all work with humans or relate to humans in some capacity. So incorporating an understanding of ACEs into our work and relationships is really about building understanding and compassion. And we'll think about that on the next slide. So this data on the left comes from the original ACE study. And early smoking initiation here is defined as beginning smoking at age 12 or younger. So again, we can see that same dose-response relationship where the lower the ACE score, the lower the likelihood that someone started smoking at 12 or younger. And then with 4 or more, we see a much higher ratio. So we live in an era now where everybody knows the health impacts of smoking and the risks associated. So why might a child with a high ACE score start smoking? Well, we know that nicotine is soothing to the nervous system. It can help with anxiety and depression. And if we're thinking about a child with 4 or more ACEs, that's a lot of adversity to experience. Again, we can think back to those words that we identified earlier, hypervigilant, on edge, depression, anxiety, isolation. These are things that a child with a high ACE score may be experiencing. And without access perhaps to mental health care or some of the resources that they may need, we can see how they might choose this as a coping mechanism or self-medication tool. So in this way, we can begin to reframe, okay, it's not just about sharing the information of the risks, it's digging a little deeper into understanding how people have been impacted. So this demonstrates that mental shift. In the old paradigm, we might approach a difficult encounter with a client or a coworker or family member by kind of internally asking, like, what's wrong with you? Or why can't you just fill in the blank? With the new paradigm, the question is really about, how can I support you in feeling safe in this moment? And of course, this isn't always easy. In that moment when we're faced with a difficult behavior or encounter, it can be hard to keep this in the forefront of your mind. If you think back to the video, some of those conflicts or challenging behaviors might trigger our own sense of threat, and then we're dysregulated. So again, that's where learning to work with our nervous system more fluidly can be really helpful. So just as we have the power to change our mindset around adversity and health and behaviors, we also have the power to grow our capacity for resilience. So that concludes our ACEs portion. We're moving into the resilience portion. And looks like we're on time. So there are protective factors that buffer some of the impacts of adversity during childhood and throughout the lifespan, which is why we say that ACEs are not predictive of health outcomes on an individual level. So this model breaks it down into 3 categories: our individual capabilities, our attachment and belonging, and our community, culture, and spirituality. So individual capabilities include things like the ability to regulate our nervous system, having that flexible nervous system that can return back to a state of calm after being activated or shut down. It also includes things like positive self-view, which lets me know I'm important and valuable and allows me to ask for help when needed, and self-efficacy, which is the belief that what I do influences the world around me and what happens to me. It's a sense of agency. So attachment and belonging are vital to our human experience. Having healthy relationships with competent adults is incredibly important. We don't have time to go into this today, but there are a whole host of slides around the impacts of concrete help. So there were studies done that show that when people have concrete help, at least 2 or more adults to offer concrete help, their symptoms of things like diabetes, depression, and other health problems are actually reduced. And that's hard data that shows that. And then, of course, we need to feel connected and feel like we belong to something larger than ourselves. So if we want to improve the health and safety of ourselves and our future generations, we also need to work on developing thriving communities that we belong to. So just as a quick analogy to kind of think through these three buckets of resilience, let's say I'm driving on the 101 and my car breaks down. Individual capabilities are things like, can I self-regulate my nervous system to be in a place where I can then think logically and rationally and make decisions and problem solve? And do I have some of the basic skills that might help me in that situation? Do I know about auto mechanics on a basic level that might support me in that moment? In terms of attachment and belonging, do I have someone I can call that can come pick me up? Do I have someone who knows those auto mechanics skills that might be able to help me out? And then in terms of community, let's say I'm not able to fix it myself. I need to get towed. I need to go to a mechanic. Do we have mechanics in town? Do I have someone who can help me figure out the bus schedule? Do we have buses in our community that are supportive and allow me to navigate this adversity without totally disrupting my life? So just a quick analogy to kind of illustrate some of these concepts. So as we are approaching the end, I'd like to do one more exercise. It's using this card deck that was developed by the Community Resilience Initiative out of Walla Walla. They created this card deck that has the 10 ACEs and then 42 resilience building skills. So I'm going to give you an ACE card and you can type in the chat which of these resilience skills might help a child mitigate or buffer that particular adversity. And I want to plug really quickly that if you're interested in this card deck and this as a tool, the Clallam Resilience Project did create, in partnership with the community, a Take Care and Be Well tiny video series. These are short little videos that are produced by local residents sharing their resilience skills from this deck. So that's also on the resource list if you want to check that out. So diving in, the first one, the ACE card is loss of a parent to death or abandonment. And the resilience skills are attachment to a caring adult, expressing feelings, the ability to calm oneself, having clear expectations and rules, giving back to the community, and modeling appropriate behavior. So in the chat, you can share which of these resilience skills feels most important for a child who has lost a parent due to death or abandonment. Attachment to a caring adult, absolutely. Thanks, Dina. Expressing feelings. Yes, absolutely. These are definitely important skills to have. All right, we'll move into the next one. Just one more and then we'll be wrapping up. So the ACE is physical neglect. And we have assigning chores to give responsibility, learning to ask for help, hope, experiencing success, developing self-esteem, and giving a child choices. We have learning to ask for help in the chat. Thank you, Stevie. Choices, absolutely. Developing self-esteem. Yes, absolutely. These are all, and hope. Thank you all for your answers. So we are concluding the training. As we wrap up, A lot of times we come away from these types of trainings wondering, okay, what's next? What do I do with this information? Because we're dealing with human beings, there's no one formula for how to implement this information. I can't tell you exactly how to apply it in your work or in your relationships. So this KISS model comes from the Community Resilience Initiative, the same group that did the card deck. And the idea is that after we gain new knowledge, it sometimes takes a while for us to get to that point of insight, and then from there be able to develop strategies and ultimately create change in our structures. So today, in a very brief 45 minutes, we were just focusing on that first step of knowledge. However, we do recognize that this is an ongoing conversation. It's not just a one and done. So there are a few ways to get involved in more of an ongoing basis that I'd like to share with you. The first being that we have the Clallam Resilience Project hosts a community meeting every month on the first Tuesday of the month from 10 to 11:30 on Zoom. It's very informal, you can drop in. We have rotating speakers that are local and experts in their fields. So that's one way to kind of be part of a community, of a learning community that you can check in every month or as often as you'd like. And the link to that is on the resource list. Another opportunity is that we are actually hiring. I'm currently an AmeriCorps member, and my service will be up in August, and so we are recruiting for someone to join our team and fill the role that I'm currently in. So if you know someone, again, that's on the resource list. Those links are there. Please share that out. And then finally, if you'd like to do a deeper dive into all of this with your agency, there's a collaborative learning academy opportunity. It's free to participate. Two to four people from your agency could attend one monthly 3-hour session, and you will dive into this material deeper and be able to work through it as part of a community, and then work through it more particularly with your agency. So again, that's linked on the resource list. Applications are due by August 5th, and there is a stipend for your agency to attend. So that about wraps it up. I am going to put a link to this a survey in the chat. If you don't mind filling that out, that gives us a lot of information for how we can improve in the future. So we really appreciate that. We're going to throw on some tunes for a few minutes while folks do that if you'd like. And if you need to go, we understand that as well. And then we'll give that about 3 minutes, and after that we'll open it up for Q&A. So I am going to put that link in the chat. All right, feel free to keep working on that if you're not done. I want to open it up if folks have thoughts or experiences they like to share or questions. I know it was a lot of information packed into 45 minutes, so we moved through it quite quickly. But
I didn't have any questions, Kaylin, but I think you did a great job. I like the addition of the cards at the end. I think that was a neat way to utilize that deck. So.
Thank you. I borrowed that from someone else. I wish that were my idea, but some folks in Snohomish did that, and I thought that was very useful.
Yeah, I liked it. Great job.
I mean, I didn't really have a question for this session, but something that I was thinking about, because I've been doing a few different trainings that talked about like vagal tone and polyvagal theory, and like something that's like come up personally was like vasovagal syncope. So I was just like thinking about how all of those things connect and like wanting to do more research about that.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I'm familiar with polyvagal theory, but I wasn't familiar with that specific term that you shared. Do you mind telling us about that or what you know about it?
Vasovagal syncope.
Yes.
So basically what that is it's fainting that comes from like low blood pressure when your vagal nerve is stimulated. It can be through like different physical responses like vomiting or defecation, but also like if you're in a warm environment or other stressful environments, like if people get extremely excited or stressed. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, for folks who aren't familiar with polyvagal theory, it has a lot to do with that video that we watched, the different states of brain and nervous system functioning under different states of stress. And I personally find that fascinating. I'm not really someone who has always been that interested in like anatomy and things like that, but in this context, I find that I've been learning a lot about the vagus nerve and some other things that Maddie had mentioned, and it's fascinating. Any other thoughts or reflections? Have folks been exposed? It sounds like Maddie has some experience in this area, but other folks are familiar with the ACE study, familiar with some of these topics from before?
I've been trained with Clallam with the neurosciences, so I kind of like to check things out and see how people are doing it. Bridges Out of Poverty and Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By World is another good curriculum to get some of that information and help do some applications with that. That's through the AHA process. And I also want to put a plug in for that collaborative. I know OLICAP participated in that collaborative when it was offered last time. And if your agency is definitely interested in it, it's a great opportunity to sit down and do some planning and get some great information throughout that's happening throughout the community. So definitely go for that.
Yes, thank you, Dina. You heard it from someone who participated. I was not around when they did the collaborative learning academies last time, so thank you for sharing that, Dina. I've heard really good things